Hello. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are very excited to have with us a panel discussion, a conversation on missing, murdered, or Indigenous people. Tonight, for our panel, we have Whitney Fear, Lissa Yellowbird Chase, Amanda Strauss, and Ruth Buffalo is joining us virtually. This program this evening is part of One Book, One Community, and we have a number of partners for that. Our local libraries, college libraries, the Yumkomst Historical Clay County Historical Society, the Indigenous Association, and Moorhead Area Public Schools has been a partner this year. And so this is our second panel that we have had, and working within the Indigenous Association. And for tonight's panel, also the Fargo Moorhead MMIP Task Force. So with that, I will turn it over to our panelists, if they would like to introduce themselves.
I unmuted it once and then I thought I didn't, so I pushed the button again. Bring it back on. I'm Whitney Fear. I'm a member of the Oglala Sioux tribe. I'm a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner in the community. Before I was a nurse practitioner, I was an RN in the community for about a decade. And the majority of my time as a nurse was spent working in the mental health, community health arena of things. And during that time, got really involved with human trafficking mitigation efforts in response to increased human trafficking activity downtown Fargo.
Hi, I'm Lissa Yellowbird Chase, and I am the founder of Sanish Scouts. We do actual searches and some quasi-investigations of our missing and murdered relatives.
My name is Amanda Strauss. I am an educator through Planned Parenthood, and I work with youth teaching Native Stand. I also am a secretary for the Fargo Moorhead Murdered and Missing Indigenous Peoples Task Force, and I also am a board member for North Dakota Human Rights Coalition, so all this work kind of is intersecting.
Dosha, Nakbaga o Madashi Mia Adesheads, Mabe Sigids, Mod Zigidads, Nakbaga o. It's an honor to be here with you virtually. I wish I could be there with you in person. I'm not sure if you can hear me. And so my name is Ruth Buffalo, and I'm originally from Mandaree, and I currently reside in South Fargo. I'm a mom, and I wear many different hats, and I'm also a state legislator. Have been involved, I would say, probably heavily since 2017, and just honored to be here. Thank you for the invite, and good to see all of you relatives. Matsigidads, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Holly Mackey. I'm the executive director for the Indigenous Association. And part of our goal tonight was to bring local activists together, particularly as we've seen our local activists' reputations and efforts recognized on a much larger scale over time. And so we wanted to talk tonight about some federal initiatives that are going on, state initiatives that are going on, and really this idea of boots on the ground and thinking more about what it is we can do locally to advance these efforts. So I'm going to start with a general question. If you had to characterize kind of the movement in Fargo and the organization over time and your role in that, how would you characterize that?
Does anybody go first, or are we gonna see where? Well, so I think that the movement in this community got started around the same time as things were having more awareness raised nationwide. And, you know, that was, I think that really accelerated with the disappearance of Savannah Gray Wind. And, you know, I think it's something that has been on the minds of Indigenous people for a long time. And it just, yeah, I think there's always like the last straw kind of thing. And I think that there was a lot of events around that time where, you know, there was, you know, I know for like the Winnipeg area, like Tina Fontaine was kind of the last straw up there. Was a missing homeless youth that was found in the Red River up there in Winnipeg around the same time period, actually. And her death remaining like unprosecuted or whatever. But again, I think that a lot of people feel really close to the issue. You know, I know where I grew up at, which was on Pine Ridge Reservation, a pretty high number of missing individuals and people being gone for a long time and not really finding people ever, or it taking a really long time. Jurisdictional stuff is weird down there because of the Dawes Act and some other things. And, you know, I think that for me, you know, really getting involved is kind of a two-part thing. You know, I guess my family has their own history in that. Whenever I was a little girl, one of my cousins was murdered outside of a bar. He was shot like 20 times by a Caucasian guy. And our family had to fight really hard to get that guy even charged with like third-degree manslaughter, even though he had said, "I'm going to kill you." And then he went and killed him. It should be more like a homicide charge. But the rhetoric around that towards my family was that we had ruined this man's life by having, you know, pushing towards prosecution of him instead of like letting it go or whatever. But you know, so I guess that's kind of where things started with me. But at the time when things were really getting moving in this community, there was you know, it was pretty obvious to me and my coworkers at Homeless Health Services, at Family Health Care, that there was like a substantial amount of really sketchy activity going on outside of our clinic and inside of our clinic. We're seeing people, namely young Native women who are homeless, you know, really like brutally like abused and being really terrified to talk about it at all. And you know, and people are reluctant to talk about stuff like that in those circles. They don't want to get, you know, nobody wants to be the cop caller or whatever, but this was like a whole new level of fear. It was really substantial. And there was a lot of unfamiliar faces around too. And so, you know, we set to kind of work of trying to collaborate with law enforcement and the Human Trafficking Task Force, and got really connected with them and did some really good education of our staff. Our whole staff at Family Healthcare has been educated on human trafficking, recognizing it, and how to prompt law enforcement to respond, how to have those conversations with someone, which is great, and something that we're keeping the conversation going. And like I said, I think that's been my niche that I found, I guess, is again that healthcare part, especially nursing. That's my background. I think that, you know, nursing has been the most trusted profession in the United States for like 17 years in a row, above the military, above police, above firefighters, not anything on them. We're really trusted. And so I think that we need to earn that by doing a really good job in a position that we could probably do a good job in. And I think that that's a little piece of the pie here with MMIP stuff, but it is something that can make a difference in.
Hello, Alyssa Yellowbird Chase here, and like she just said, when it came to the Gray Wind case, I think we're making baby steps as far as responding to people with a high percent of becoming a missing and murdered Indigenous person. We have a long, long way to go. I can tell you right now, one of the most concerning things for me is that we had a 3-year-old Standing Rock boy that died of a homicide here in Fargo, and nobody has closed that case. Nobody has addressed it. His name was Blue, and that case has just gone stale. I'm sure nobody has any intentions of readdressing the justice that needs to be served to this young boy. So that tells me we have a long way to go. One of the other things is when, what are we utilizing? Now, I don't live here anymore, but when I did live here, we had the Native American Commission. And I think in some respects, we kind of utilize that as a citizen review board of sorts when it comes to blatant discriminatory practice towards our people. One is sexual assaults that take place here. I have been in touch with many Native American women who have made complaints about SANE nurses when it comes to sexual assault here in Fargo-Moorhead area. Now, those things have never been, who do you report that to? I have made calls on some of my cases to the medical review board. It went nowhere. There had been some complaints that did come to the commission that got tabled a few times, and I don't think those were ever readdressed. So what are we going to do to keep our people off the books? These are all contributing factors to why people go missing and murdered. One of the other situations is people who are homeless and have protective payees. You will not even believe the number of people that go missing after a large check comes in, whether it be a tribal check, Social Security, disability, things like that. If you're getting a check, your chances of going missing are going up. Who's overseeing these people? And do we have competent people to do that? I don't think we do. With the homeless situation, from what I understand, especially when in Fargo, but we're talking North Dakota as a whole as well, our people still aren't being properly housed. Even on the reservations and in my own homelands, MHA, we have 3-4 generations in one household, and nobody sees anything wrong with that. Out here in majority society, we have one nuclear family per household, or you're considered homeless. Why are the standards any different for our people? And so that's what concerns me. We have a long, long way to go. I can tell you I'm kind of at the end of the road when it comes to these situations. When the person goes missing, that's when I come. And it shouldn't be that way. Usually I'm called because police aren't responding. And so we need to decide what we're going to do about that. We're taxpayers too. We have a right to that same care and attention and intention to doing our people a service, and we're not receiving that. So, yeah, I'm gonna pass on that question. Thank you.
So from a local perspective, with MMIW, we are in the process of doing a strategic planning for our next steps. I guess that's about all I have to put in about, I'll let Ruth talk a little bit more on that. But on a local level, like how My W kind of started, if folks are unfamiliar. So in 2015, on a local movement, NDSU and some other organizations on a local level had a march for Singer Rivers Red. And from that, we just have been working together, and with the tragic death of Savannah LaFontaine Greywind, we started doing more local movements with law enforcement and working with Ruth on a state level with getting Savannah's Act and other local bills passed. And I can let her talk more on that, but thank you.
Hi. Yeah, I just want to echo everyone's words. I completely agree. We have a long way to go. How I got involved, I would say at the local level in Fargo. I was a grad school student at NDSU at the time when Sing Our Rivers Red coordinated a lot of amazing events, including the huge earring exhibit that now travels nationwide. So I was a graduate assistant at American Indian Public Health Resource Center and assisted the public health program manager, public health services program manager, Hannah Bablu. And so as graduate assistants, we attended the different events in the area and just provided assistance in trying to raise awareness. But I remember that summer following the case up in Winnipeg, which would be further downstream from us here in Fargo, or there in Fargo on the Red River. But just being struck by the lack of police response at that time in Winnipeg, and seeing on the news, I saw a video of community members who were dragging, like combing the bottom of the lake there, because where the Red River ends up there, it goes into this big lake. And so they were, taking action, taking it upon themselves. And then we ended up helping with the search, for Savannah in 2017. And I remember hearing Lissa Yellowbird Chase speak that I'm getting, I always get emotional, but I remember hearing her speak that winter of 2015 that Amanda Strauss had mentioned, the SOAR, Sing Our Rivers Red events. And so as I was going to the search, I remember reaching out to Lissa, and she was super accessible, which I'm very thankful for. I asked, I'm going to the search. What do I need to bring? How can I be most helpful? And she, responded right away, gave me a list of things to do. And so we just got to work from there on gathering supplies and things. And so I, commend Lissa and everyone who does searches on a regular basis, because that's heavy work. And so what we've tried to do since then is make sure that we are taking action and looking for accountability in the across different jurisdictions. I think of the city level, county, state, in trying to find ways to prevent further tragedies from happening. And really this coming from, a mom and from a big sister standpoint. But I don't know if you want me to touch on like some of the legislation later, but that's what I'll add at this time. So thank you, Matsikidads.
So thank you all for that. And yes, I think the legislation will be important. So one of the reasons we wanted to do this panel at this time is because we're coming off of October with Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and then right into Native American Heritage Month. And for those of you who might not be familiar, National Congress of American Indians today held a session talking about Savannah's Act, the Not Invisible Act, and the National Action Plan for Missing and Murdered. And then the American Indian Justice Conference was also held today speaking about these issues. And what strikes me is no matter how far we come, we seem to be having the same conversations over and over again. So I'm curious from our panelists, what is something that you wish people would pay more attention to, or what do you see as something that might help us turn a corner towards more effective ways to address the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples issue.
I guess something that I think I see a lot, and QAnon stuff hasn't helped with, are a lot of stereotypes and misinformation about human trafficking and how it happens. A lot of perpetuating that, like, it's some big guy that like clubs you over the head and puts you in a trunk and you know, takes off with you. And does that happen? Sure, but not very often. And I think that maybe the reason that the conversation doesn't stick with the facts is because the facts are a lot grittier, terrible, gross reality, and which is really difficult for a lot of people to imagine or accept that the majority of this activity is perpetuated by people who very strategically spend a lot of time getting to know somebody, earning their trust, doing something we call trauma bonding, which is like abusing somebody, then loving them, abusing them, then loving them, abusing them, then loving them, until they create something called cognitive dissonance, or kind of not being able to trust yourself. And so they put all their trust in this person to tell them what they should think. And so if you don't even know what you should think about something, that's something a lot of people, I guess, would probably associate with the term Stockholm Syndrome, which describes, there's a robbery at a bank in Stockholm, and the robber was very effective at this method of things, so much so that one of the tellers actually like was going to like throw herself in front of bullets for this guy, you know, and because she was convinced that this guy was like the savior, good guy, the cops are the bad guys, all this. And so, you know, I see a lot of things shared, like, you know, someone was like following me around Walmart or whatever, and these things might be happening, right? But like, what about the person who's talking to your kid on Snapchat a lot? You know, or what about the person, you know, who's, you know, gotten in your little brother's trust pretty deeply, and they, you know, you're the only one who understands me. Well, maybe you should come and live with me. Maybe I should come and pick you up, you know. And the reason that things happen this way more often, and again, this is really gross, gritty reality stuff. Like, this is the kind of stuff that it makes it really hard to work in doing this stuff, because it's things that, honestly, like having kids and nieces makes it kind of hard to sleep at night sometimes, to be totally honest. Like, my kid made a secret TikTok account and about like gave me a heart attack when I saw it. I was like, no. Because if your victim loves you and wants to be with you, they will never leave. And you can use them up until there's nothing left of them. Again, really harsh, terrible reality, but the way that people view other people in this kind of industry is no different than they view a bag of drugs. You're good until they can't sell you anymore. And that's the limitation on somebody's value. And thinking about your loved one like that is like, you know, it sucks, but it's true. And you know, it's very hard for people to get away from that. I'll tell you that the people I first started seeing this happen to 6 or 7 years ago, they're still involved in it. We haven't gotten them out yet. And this is like, you know, really being radically supportive and there for people on a regular basis, their team, and still haven't gotten them out of that yet, because that's how deep that connection is. So that's something I really, you know, like, really, I think there needs to be some better conversations about social media. I've had somebody from Homeland Security tell me, if you want to protect your kid, don't let them have TikTok or Snapchat. Snapchat, the messages delete automatically. If your kid screenshots them, the person who they're talking to knows they did it. Okay? And TikTok, I mean, it's amazing how much information that app tracks. And kids often make really big mistakes. Recording a video of themselves with Fargo Bruins, t-shirt on, now they know where your kid lives and what school district they attend, what school. They've narrowed it from world to one school instantly in one video. And then they can find things in common with them and they can connect with them. So I think that's probably one thing that's really concerning for me, is just making it seem like the danger is like right behind you, like a boogeyman, but it's a lot more nefarious and tricky than that.
I'd like to say that in regard to that question would be that we need sensitivity training. Now, when I did live here in Fargo, there was supposed to be a sensitivity training that took place with Fargo PD after we had an incident at the sweat lodge. And I don't know if that ever happened. But I can tell you that at the point of my moving from Fargo, it hadn't happened yet. I know that the sweat lodge, which is really important aspect of recovery, is now no longer in the works. So that's concerning. One of the other issues is, I can tell you right now off the top of my head, some of the biggest factors that go into account when people go missing. That's homelessness. It's addiction. What do we have for addiction here that's culturally appropriate for our people? And as a person in recovery, I don't necessarily think it's always the easy answer to be shipping people out. Oh, send them back to the res. And then what? That's like sending people from the res to the city and then bringing them back to the res. You need to have the accommodations here. So I don't know what services are available for people with addiction. I don't know if there's any culturally sensitized type of recovery groups that are offered here, if anybody's picked up that baton and ran with it. I know we used to have Red Road Recovery. I was the president of that chapter for a while. And I know that is no longer in service either. So as we get these things going, who's gonna make sure that there's some longevity so that people have the resources available to them? What are we doing for our single moms? Our single moms, and being a single parent household, then you have these children that are basically waving in the wind for, like she said, the groomers who are waiting. They know you're coming from a single parent household. What are the resources for these moms or dads? I know there's a few, there's single dads are a thing too. Who's helping them? I don't know. I think they were talking about a community center here, and we need something well-rounded to start addressing all these issues. I know that there's housing advocates here for Native Americans. That needs to be beefed up because, when you're worrying about what you're going to eat and where you're going to lay your head that night, that leaves you wide open to a lot of predatory behavior. There are people here, and I know, I speak truth, so I know I make some people uncomfortable. We have people here that are selling themselves for a place to lay their head. Now, that's not fair. And we have people waiting to exploit. We have landlords in this town that are still operating and have the same expectations. They look at Native women as a resource for their sexual desires, for a place to live. And what is our city doing about that? What are they doing? Where do you go with a complaint like that? Who's gonna listen? Then it becomes your word against theirs. Where's the advocates for that? We have people that go, you need medical care. We have triage nurses that are basically making the call at our local hospitals, whether somebody needs a service or not. They weed you out right there. And I've seen that happen before. So, until we start dealing with some of these hard issues, what are we going to do about these kids that are being sexually abused while these mothers are being exploited too? because that predatory behavior is all under that one roof. And those kids are subject to that same exploitation. What are these moms doing when they need to go to work and they're leaving these children with the exploiter so that they can put food on the table? Who even wants to talk about that? That's the necessary things I think need to be looked at, and it's imminent. Thank you.
I just have a small piece to say. I would like to see more like education for youth, more uplifting of youth, more education for folks that don't understand the social, environmental, and other impacts that cause some of the similar situations that Alyssa was speaking of. If we had more cultural approach, more healing-based approach, if we had education for internet safety for our youth, even unhealthy and healthy relationships, risk factors, all these things play into these spaces where groomers can come in and, violate our youth. And we're seeing this happening more and more, and we have to worry now too with the new project and camps coming into our own community too. So that's another thing that is something that we will have to be working with. So thank you.
Yes, again, just want to echo the words of all the previous speakers. Definitely would like to see our Native American people to be viewed as humans, human beings. I think for me, that's where a lot of the issue stems from. And I think that's kind of what I've been hearing too throughout the panel is that it's a common theme, is that we're not truly viewed as human beings. And so how do we humanize this issue, this epidemic to the larger society? So like that's really what is on the mind, on top of mind and on my heart right now, is that we're not viewed as human beings. We're often viewed as less than, because if we were viewed as human beings, we would have, rapid response. We would have the media coverage that we deserve. We would listen to victims the first time they tell you something's happening. Also, predators would not target Native American women, children, men, all of us, if they knew that something was going to be done. I think of Indian reservations as well, being from Mandaree. In 2011 through 2014, I ran our tribe's summer youth employment program. And I think of an incident that happened in broad daylight. One of our youth workers was walking to the Mandaree powwow or Mandaree celebration, broad daylight, and a red truck pulls up and two guys get out and try to drag her into the truck. And luckily she fought her way out of it and ran to safety in a nearby house. And so how do we get from, reactive to more proactive? How do we, work further upstream? I think of predators and how they know nothing is going to be done. That there's certain areas that are hot spots, and we try to do what we can. I remember back then we had already partnered with the North Dakota Safety Council, and we were providing a Live at 25 defensive driving course for our youth workers. But then we called them back up and said, hey, this happened. Do you have anything that could help us? And so they came and brought the Predator Stalker Safety Awareness course, which was basically self-defense. But there again, how do we move from sort of putting Band-Aids on things to that long-term sustainable change that we need? I know we do need a lot of services in North Dakota, in Fargo, across all different jurisdictions. We don't have for example, we don't have a specific shelter for our Native American Indigenous women. And there are huge gaps within the current system. I think people are doing the best they can, to give them benefit of the doubt who are working in these systems, but we do truly need safe places for our Native American relatives. So, mods a good odds. Thank you.
Thank you all for your answers. And we know that the goal is to work ourselves out of a job as it relates to missing and murder. That's the goal that we all have. But unfortunately, that's not where we're at right now. So I'm going to shift my question a little bit because I know that we have a number of people watching online and a number of allies in the audience who might like to hear your thoughts on how to be good allies, right? Both in the prevention and intervention side of things, but specifically as well, I think, Lissa, with your experience on searches. There's a number of things that well-intentioned people can do that don't actually help as much as they think they do. So whether you want to answer the question from a prevention or intervention side, or if you'd like to address when you're actually out trying to find somebody, or I think there's something to be said about families as well, right? So all of you have worked with families who have people who've been lost, people who've been murdered. And so what can people do to help without causing more harm or further traumatizing those who have lost somebody?
I think that I think that there are some great allies out there, and there's a way to do that very well. And I think that currently, with the Native Commission, myself and Lenore King, who's here, the chair, approached law enforcement about some concerns, stuff going on downtown with some with sexual assaults we felt weren't, we were hearing weren't, the victims didn't feel they were being addressed adequately or in an expedited manner. And the law enforcement allies that we have connected with have been really responsive, and they are working to bring a effective group together to collaborate and figure out how to best approach the issue, and kind of having those the good discussions, kind of figuring out where exactly the the misstep is, in the justice process. Is a long process, and convoluted. So anyway, I think that that's an example, with the service provider kind of aspect of things. Something we know that would be tremendously helpful would be to have a more diverse workforce. But and I got to a point where I was kind of banging my head against the wall, to be totally frank, trying to figure out how to get that done in North Dakota, because I kind of raised Cain about it, and I would hear, well, let's maybe do it like a loan repayment program for people who get a doctorate. I'm like, people aren't even getting out of high school. How are they going to use this loan repayment program? Nobody's going to be able to access. That's ridiculous. You got to get people to college first. That's where you got to start. Kids got to feel like, I need to finish high school because there's college opportunity waiting for me. I can do this. I can get to that next step. Because I'll tell you, I almost dropped out of high school because I didn't think there was a chance in hell that I could ever do anything with my life. I was totally hopeless. I thought, this is stupid, pointless. I'm not going to go to school anymore. What am I going to do? Go to college? I can't even afford. My family can't afford that. So it makes a big difference. And I ended up, I don't know. I had a gut feeling. I kind of gushed to somebody, kind of at a more national level, and they've been such a amazing ally to me, and really connected me with some great people who have been really helpful, and who are working really hard to connect some Native, Indigenous-led movements to things after those conversations. So I mean, they're out there for sure, and I think every time that I get an email from that person that's talking about is somebody that the time was working at Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Now they're with AARP. Getting an email from them, hey, do you know anybody doing this kind of work on one of the reservations or tribal entities in North Dakota? Can you connect me with them? Because and it's always like, we want to give somebody some money to do some work. There's some money waiting. I think like that's a great ally, right? Like who can you connect me with who deserves the funding for this and who's gonna do it well? And this person has told me Indigenous people need to be leading these movements, and that's what a lot of people are interested in at the national level. So they're out there, and there's definitely a way to do it well. So if you're an ally, those are some examples of doing it well.
When it comes to allies, I have a high value on allies, especially non-Indigenous allies. With that being said, I'd like Jemima Hepner to stand up and say hi real quick. Jemima has been with me in Sanish Scouts since the beginning. Thank you. And her kid, I think they're both in here, maybe not. They've always had her back as well. And I think when it comes to making good allies, and I mean this in the most truest sense, I have to give credit to her because she's actually stuck through a lot of uncomfortable situations where she has not been felt very welcome by some of our own Indigenous circles. They know that Jemima is an ally. And it's not just a one-sided deal, it's on both sides. Our people need to realize as well that when we have an Indigenous ally person that has our back, even if they make us feel a little uncomfortable, we need to be open to that. Sometimes we do, because we don't see things inside of the circle all the time. And so she's come up a few times and says, I'm trying to do this, Lissa, and she knows I'll be whipping the cracking the whip right there. And why didn't you get this information? Well, she got some pushback, and I understand that, and I don't try to force her on people, but I do expect in public venues that she will have access. And it's been hard for her. So, and I value her work. We all have our own shortcomings. Sometimes I don't say, things don't come out right. I don't mean to offend anybody. But I think also in this movement that we have to be humble enough to recognize when somebody points out one of our faults. I haven't always been right. I haven't always been the most approachable person. We all have our moments, and we just need to realize that we're human and that we all have the same ending goal, and that's to help the people. So I think we need to, treat our allies with care and respect, but in the same breath, they bring a lot to the table, because when they go to their folks, and these are the people that are telling majority society what we're going through. And we need those interpreters in our corners. So, it's kind of you got to tiptoe your way through it, and I don't have any easy answers. I am just throwing that out there for everybody, because we need to keep our allies close. And I'm not saying every ally or every friend or any relationship you have ever, some of them don't last forever. We know that, but to be human. So, I like to value those kind of interpreters for me. They know a lot of people that through networking, people have access to different programming, different ideas. Sometimes we got to meet in the middle because the colonized way of doing things doesn't really suit our liking, but there's a gray area where we can negotiate, and we need those people to help us through that part. So I'm big on the allies thing. I think that, if we all just step back sometimes and just, look at the bigger picture, remember it's not about us, it's about the people. That's it.
For me, a lot of it boils down to, I don't have all the answers, and I didn't have actually any answers, to be honest. And so I just knew that like Whitney, homeless is something that is completely heartbreaking to me. People without homes, or and then with many people living in a home, the rules that are on housing, like one family can stay in a home. You can't have your mom spend the nights. There's lots of different factors, and there's lots of different organizations that need to come together and intersect in this work, like, child services, law enforcement. All of these are allies. And I guess for me, one of the biggest things is showing up and being there. You don't need to have all the answers, and then just listening to the leaders that are, running things so that you know how to be appropriate, I guess, in some situations, because there is things you can do that are disrespectful. So, and then also, I mean, there are a lot of ways, violence is preventable, sometimes by, simple trainings like, rape and abuse has a little training that they do to kind of, so you can look around. I think it's called Green Dot. So you can notice if there's something happening in your area, and they don't want you to go and do something, but sometimes there's simple things you can do. Like if there's a situation happening, you could maybe even ask, does anybody have directions for somewhere? And it could maybe, activate them to maybe change their situation that they're in. Of course, you'd want to be safe in these situations, but there are things you can do. And so I guess it's just kind of reach out in the community, like they're doing like this. And I guess the biggest thing is show up.
Yeah, I agree with all the previous speakers. So one thing I think, just to kind of build off of what was said is talk to your networks, have what allies can do to help to not further damage or traumatize families, is really talk to your network, talk to your families, just have those one-on-one conversations, because you do play a very important role in helping us educate others on the epidemic. Showing up also. I remember when the search, that we helped with Savannah, I remember being asked to kind of put out different fires. One was addressing people who were starting GoFundMe accounts, who had no ties with the family. And so it was a real eye-opener to see that sort of behavior. And so I would really encourage allies to don't be afraid to reach out to one of us, do your research. But going back to what Whitney shared, it is an Indigenous-led movement, but allies, like Lissa shared so eloquently, we need allies. I remember Judith LeBlanc shared one time, she said, if we could save the earth by ourselves, we would have done it by now. We need allies. And so really find ways to amplify the voices on the ground, on the front lines, vote. Yes, of course, vote, but also donate to Sanish Scouts, help support the work, the boots on the ground. They're very grassroots led organization. So that's one sure way to help is donate to boots on the ground, and talk to your network, talk to your family, and help us educate others on the issue, on the epidemic. So thank you, Madzigads.
If I may.
Did you say GoFundMe?
If I may, I just wanted to remind Ruth that we had talked about this. So for this district even, we could start, and I would love to see Ruth set the trend here in Fargo. One of the suggestions we had talked about was, when our people go missing and murdered, what about maybe the city of Fargo or North Dakota as a whole or something, utilize FMLA to let families look for their loved ones. We have FMLA if you adopt a child, if you give birth, if your mother-in-law is sick, and your coworkers in a lot of places can actually donate time to you so that you continue to take care of your loved one. We should be able to utilize something like that for if one of our loved ones is missing. So that was one thing that Ruth and I had talked about not too long ago. And I have faith that she's working on that. But I think it would be really interesting for Fargo to, being that they had the first commission in the United States here, to set the trend on utilizing FMLA for their workers. And maybe we could start a wave, a movement here right out of Fargo. So I just reminding you, Ruth.
Thank you. Noted.
So just to touch on a couple of things you've said, if you're unfamiliar with Green Dot, there's a community Green Dot as well as an NDSU Green Dot. If you wanted to contact Megan Talcott at NDSU, she can connect you with that. But very importantly, right, this work costs money. Right? We know this costs money, and we know that people pay out of pocket. And so we will make sure on Indigenous Association's page to get any contact information if you wanted to fund Sonner Scouts, as well as the MMIP task force, so we can provide you that information. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and part of this you might not have answers, I don't know, but I think it's remarkable to be sitting in Fargo right now and know that so much that is happening nationally has started here, and started here in particular with the people who are on this panel. And so I want to ask about legislation and some jurisdictions and some tribal codes, and so I don't know if any of you are up to date on all of the stuff going on. I just learned about a lot of it today. So, but I did want to make sure we took some time to acknowledge that when we say we have the first NAC, when we talk about Savannah's Act, that started here. When we talk about the Not Invisible Act, right, largely influenced by the work that was happening here. I wanted to ask you if you're familiar with any tribal law and order codes that have been changed to specifically address MMIP or trafficking. And then Ruth, give you an opportunity to also talk about some of the state level efforts, or if you've been in contact with the federal level legislators, if you know what's happening on that front. The question's for everybody, but I don't know how much you guys might know about all of it.
I probably don't have a whole lot to offer on this, other than something I recently found out that I'm really interested in talking to some legislators about, is that I recently found out it's, this is kind of an assumption, I guess, wrong assumption on my part, that apparently your minor children can be questioned by the police without their parent present. I didn't know that until my 8-year-olds were questioned by the police without me or their father present last week. And that involved actually my 8-year-old daughter is sharing with police that she had been hit in the face by another child, an older child, and they told her she was lying. And so I think that that whole situation, wasn't even mentioned, to their father about the assault component of that thing. And so it was all like a convoluted mess because, they're like terrified 8-year-old kids talking to the cops for the first time. And so I was asking, I had actually asked, she wasn't able to be here tonight, but Annie Lafrinra Ritchie, who is on the board of Indigenous Association. And I've worked a lot with on human trafficking mitigation stuff. She works for Someplace Safe in Minnesota. And she was saying how that can be a real hindrance issue with minor trafficking victims too, is that they feel like kind of stuck, kind of trapped, and that it can be really uncomfortable for them. And looking in a little bit more into it, apparently it's because minors don't have the same civil rights as adults do in regards to those things. It's kind of a loophole sort of thing, and so I think that might be something to really work on, for sure, with figuring out how do we provide, because we know things don't go well with minors and our children speaking to the police. From a mental health perspective, kids are very easily influenced by power figures. There were some young men, a good example, young men in New York that served a lot of time for a rape that they didn't commit but ended up confessing to because they were interrogated by the police to the point of confessing even though they hadn't done it. And they sat in prison until the guy who did do it felt guilty about it and fessed up. But so I think that, yeah, that's something, I guess, that very recently kind of came up, and I think that that'd be good to look at, is that I think that kids do deserve that right to say, hey, I need an adult with me.
As far as jurisdiction. As far as jurisdiction and the laws regarding our people, one of the things I think was a good start was the Savannah Act. When that was kind of brought to my attention and wanted thoughts on that, I did talk to Ruth about it, and my feelings back then were it needed to include men, and it does now. So one of the things that I think something gets lost between the municipal and tribal level versus the federal level at times, people don't clearly understand the level of duty we have when things become law. And so that's where the Not Invisible and the Commission for Missing and Murdered under Deborah Halen, I was doing some research on Lady Justice's commission, and one of the things that kind of concerned me is, and this is, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way to Deborah Halen, but I was reading up on the situation with being on that commission, and it said that any of the members that are elected to this commission are there strictly voluntary. They will not be paid other than, hotel and mileage or whatever to get to and from these meetings. Now, all the other commissions get paid. So if this is a priority, why would we expect all the experts in Indian country to participate on this commission for no pay? Like, our time is not important. I thought this was a priority, right? So that was one of the issues that came up as a concern for me. The second issue with that would have been that then they had this vetting process. One of my friends has made it to the second level of this vetting process, and they want to do some background checks, and they want to do all these things. Now, for myself, I would not be eligible to do that. I'm a felon. I'm an addict in recovery, but still an addict, and I went to prison for my addiction. And even though it saved my life, would that mean that I would be ineligible to represent Native women on this commission for no price anyway? You want 5-star, no history, no nothing on your commission for free? So yeah, I find that kind of problematic. If we say that we're making our Indian people a priority, you need to put your money where the mouth is. And that's starting with Deborah Halen's office. Thank you.
I don't have much to add here. I did go to so some of the things she's speaking of, Lissa, here, I am a little bit familiar with the commission because they did have that application just kind of opening up, and it's closed now. But and so I went to Operation Lady Justice training. It's like an initiative training that they offered, and just to give a little brief, because I don't have much to add except for there is a lot of work being done Now, I guess I can't speak to if it's all being done in a good way. But they had multiple listening groups that they had held throughout many communities. I think it's 9 regions. And the one thing I could say as a plus is it seems as if there is more access to like more collaborative resources together. More like you can, there's more access to have numbers to call, because like they had spoke of, we didn't, we don't even have, like, who do we call? And so there's still so much more work to do, but that is, that's a plus in that direction.
So I can speak a little to what was introduced at the state level here in North Dakota in 2019. There were, let's see, 6 pieces of legislation introduced in the state legislature in North Dakota, and that package of bills was provided to me by the local task force. And all of them did pass. They went through both the House and the Senate, even the resolutions and the studies, but I remember Senator Kathy Hogan kind of sharing this before the task force meeting. She said, hey, why don't you ask the task force if they could come up with a wish list of what they want to see implemented in the state legislature in this upcoming session? Because it was the first meeting after the election. So it was, the last week of November. And so it was like, yeah, it was like green light, great idea. And so the task force gave me a list of bills, and afterwards I was kind of having a debrief with Senator Kathy Hogan, after the legislative session, and she said, we were talking amongst each other, and we were saying we would just be happy with one of them passing. I was like, gee, you should have told me that, because no, just kidding, because it was, they're all needed, and they're not by any means the be all end all, but it's a start, but right now is the follow through, making sure that these new laws that went into effect August 1st, 2019, are more than words on paper, that they are being effective. So two of them were specific to MMIP. We intentionally changed women to people to include all genders, not to by any means diminish the violence that women face either, so it was to be inclusive of all genders. So the first bill was, I think, 1311, House Bill 1311, to provide law enforcement training regarding missing and murdered Indigenous people. And the other one was to start a missing persons database. That was House Bill 1313. And that database is to be housed underneath the Attorney General's office, which includes the Criminal Justice Information System and BCI, Bureau of Criminal Investigation. And so right now, again, as it did a year ago, and following up with these new laws to make sure that they're being implemented, are they being effective? What we found with House Bill 1313, establishing a missing persons database, is that it's not functioning, that they don't have enough funding for it. So it's not functioning. In visiting with different key stakeholders, they've shared with me that in some agencies, they're keeping a spreadsheet of all missing people that they are aware of. And so with the American Rescue, ARPA funds, America Rescue Plan Act funds that were given to the state of North Dakota from the federal government for this past month, the appropriations committees have been meeting on different proposals that were submitted. So I was able to get a proposal, and it's so awkward to say I all the time, but it's, so I'm going to say we, but we had introduced or was able to get a proposal in to get the missing persons database functioning or established. And back when this bill became law, or when it was passed in 2019, it had a one-time fiscal note of $75,000, passed the House appropriations, and went to the Senate, but then the Senate sliced it so it passed into law without the fiscal note, without funding. So we were able to get that in this past summer. But then after having conversations with BCI, they said they need 300,000 in order for it to be functioning. The 300,000 is 4 times the original ask within only 2 years ago. And so still trying to make sense of that. But so where it's at right now is it did get submitted to the Senate, started in the Senate appropriations at 300,000, but didn't get enough votes. So on the House side, we were able to get it passed at 75,000. So it will be introduced in the special session come Monday, November 8th, where we'll vote on it. But I still have an opportunity to provide an amendment to it to bring it back up to 300,000. But all of this has caused a lot of conversation throughout the state with different key stakeholders or people who, especially people who are, data experts. And one thing that we have discussed also is that the importance of, data sovereignty, protecting data, and looking to see if tribal colleges would be able to start their own databases. We know, like our tribal enrollment offices, they have their own databases and they're more accurate than census data, so that's something that's kind of in the works, is looking at tribal colleges to start their own databases. That way it's protected. It's protected by each tribal nation, and also to not run into the, to not be exploited, to not have their data exploited. So there's that component to it. But from a state legislator role, also I'm looking for accountability and making sure that the state government is also doing their part to help prevent further tragedies from happening. The 2 other bills focused on training, human trafficking prevention and awareness training, one for schools, one for hotels. And then a resolution urging Congress to pass Savannah's Act. And then a comprehensive study looking at the intersection between MMIP cases and human trafficking cases. And so all of those 6 bills passed both the House and the Senate. But what I learned in my first session in 2019 was that even if your study passes both the House and Senate, so that means it gets introduced, it gets assigned to a committee, it goes before the committee then will give it a do pass or do not pass recommendation, then it gets sent to the House floor or the Senate floor for a full vote. If it passes there, then it crosses over to the other chamber, gets assigned to a committee, and then goes to the full floor for a vote. But with the studies, this particular one, so all the studies, after they go through both the House and the Senate, they go in front of legislative management, which is about 13 legislators in early June. They then go through all the studies that made it out of both chambers, and then they decide which studies basically make the cut. Which studies are they going to study during the interim year? Because in North Dakota, we meet every other year. And so that particular study, MMIP, and the intersection between human trafficking cases was not selected in 2019. And the reasoning, I'm told, is that they want to see how these other new laws play out and if there will be any unmet needs. So that's kind of where things are at right there, is the follow through in making sure that these new laws are being enforced, that they're more than words on paper. I know within our respective MHA, Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation, we were the first in the country to introduce a human trafficking code, and it was named after one of my friends. We used to fancy shawl dance together, Lauren Whitehorn. And so also asking questions there, how is it going, what's happening, and was told by advocates on the ground there that everything goes to the federal level right away. So it kind of skips Lauren's law. So lots of work to be done, but learning so much. And if you are able to provide support in this upcoming special session, everything's open to the public. Support testimony as to why, that missing persons database should be funded, but also looking to really strengthen tribal data sovereignty as well. So that's kind of, on the federal level, I know recently the Family Violence Prevention Service Act passed, I think just within this past week and a half. And that's where a lot of the coalitions, like First Nations Women's Alliance or the Great Plains Women's Society out of South Dakota, that's where, so this new act, it's where, it's not new, but it's the Family Violence Prevention Act, FIPSPA. It's where the coalitions get money, and it's the first time that it has a tribal coalition component, and it's services that funds domestic violence and sexual assault programs. And then we know that the Violence Against Women Act recently passed the House, and it's now in the Senate waiting to be passed. So if you can, get on the horn and call your respective congressional delegation and urge them to vote yes on it at the federal level. And I agree too, Savannah's Act, it's a good step in the right direction, but lots of work ahead. And I think for many of us here in Fargo, it hits home to us, and we want to make sure that things are carried out in a good way, to be respectful of the family and the community, and really whole state of North Dakota who holds Savannah in our hearts. So, and definitely agree that people on commissions do need to be paid, especially for doing that, sharing our expertise, but also that emotional labor. And felons as well, that's really heartbreaking to hear that there could be problems or gaps within that vetting process, because we know that, just thinking of jurisdiction with Indian reservations, and we know that by default, we have a high number of felons. A crime that's committed across the street off the res could be a misdemeanor, but within the res, it's a felony. And then it compounds, the issues of social determinants of health and housing. A lot of the housing programs, you can't be a felon, and so it's just an ongoing evidence that there's so much work that needs to be done. So, Mods Zigadods, thank you.
Thank you all for your thoughts. We now have time for questions from the audience, and we have a microphone over there, or I can bring a microphone to you. And then, so we'll take about 10 minutes for questions, and then we'll give each of our panelists an opportunity to conclude with some closing thoughts.
I have a question for Ruth. If she has checked into the Senate Bill 172 in Oklahoma that was just passed today on Ida's law, if that would have any impact in passing any type of law here in North Dakota or using the same verbiage?
Hi, Joyce. Thank you for the question. I'm not familiar, so I would love to learn more about it. Because I know, just kind of like coaching, we try to share or exchange notes or different playbooks. So I would definitely want to learn more about that new law. We've exchanged notes with neighboring states, for example, South Dakota, Minnesota, on MMIP work. So definitely would want to learn more about it, and open to seeing how we can replicate that here in North Dakota.
Might need a legislator panel. I think Mickey Dollins is one of the co-authors of Ida's law down there. Any other questions?
I was going to add real quick, we have our National Native American Caucus meeting this Friday. So hoping that we have some representation from Oklahoma, and to hear more about the good work they're doing there.
Bonjour, everybody. I'm Tracy.
I don't have any questions, but I have a comment. I'm a director of the Heart Springs Community Healing Center here in Fargo, and we are working on securing funding for a 12-week trauma healing program for Native American. But that's it. I don't have any questions, just that we're working on, it's not a cure, it's not a fix-all, but there are people, allies, working to help us and deal with our trauma. I'm not sure the exact amount of money, but I should share my contact information with you, and do you know Dan? Okay, I'm meeting with her tomorrow.
Testing. I'm gonna make a comment, and please forgive my emotions. I'm commenting on, I'm sorry, again, my name is Brandy King. I'm from Fort Belknap Indian Community in Montana, and this is a very sensitive subject for me. And earlier you stated that you asked that the Savannah's law include MMIP. And because the why I'm thankful to hear that is my brother was murdered 4 years ago in Billings, Montana. He was stabbed and then decapitated by two white males. And they beat him for $6. And at the time, I was just being elected to a community council in Fort Belknap. I was just getting ready to go to the inauguration. The voting was completed. And by that Friday, the Fort Belknap Law Enforcement Service came to my house and told me that my brother was found in Billings. And why his story is important is because everything that was talked about was either played out in my brother's life or in my personal life. Normally it's easy for me to get up and talk about this stuff, so again, forgive me. I mean, you name it, I'll talk about it, but this one is just a little more difficult. I was 9 years old when my dad and mom took in my brothers. I don't believe in the word foster or adoption. They were my brothers. I was 9. Both of them came from Ibapa, Nevada. Out of the 5 boys, one is there was only one alive now, and he's in prison. I'm assuming he was sentenced to life for something he did not do. So his older brother, Weldon, was at a, can you guys hear me okay? Because this is making me feel weird. Is it okay? Yeah. If you guys can hear me okay, then I'm gonna keep going. So there was this, at Fort Belknap, there was this ranch, and it took in foster care, like, from all over. This was where they came. And so his older brother Weldon came up, and then they were getting ready to shut that down because funding on the reservation and resources and access to everything is difficult. So this ranch was getting ready to close down. And so my dad just didn't want Weldon to just get sent back to wherever, he just came from. He took him in under foster care. And a couple months later, Weldon asked my father, he said, hey, I have another brother. He's been into 14 different foster care homes all over Utah, all over Nevada. Would you bring him in? And my mom and dad, absolutely yes. My mom and dad were in their early 30s at the time. My mother, Oglala Lakota, and Abskalpi Kukani. She's from Browning. My father is Nakota and Little Shell. He is from Fort Belknap. So when these boys came, they were allowed whatever you want to be, but we're bringing you as Nakota. And don't forget that. Don't forget your Shoshone Goshu ancestry, but you're Nakota. This is your home. Because you said it. You said, how do we feel as Native people? I'm light-skinned, so there's things that I could see. I watch how my darker skinned folks are treated. My brothers were dark. And so when we're out, I could see how they're treated, and I can see how they were going to be treated after that. My older brother, Weldon, committed suicide. I was in the Army at the time, had to come home for that. Then Myron. Myron was murdered while trying to get himself situated in Billings. He liked being on the road. Being in foster care for so many years, that disconnect, that whatever was disconnected, it was a hard time to reconnect that. There was not anything that was failed on our mother and father's side. Nothing was failed there. We all got our butt kicked the same. We all got treated the same. There was nothing that was lacking. But all of those scars that my brothers faced from their birth to their death were all results of some system failing them. Whether it was a state system, whether it was the federal system, whether it was a tribal system, something was failing them. So this happened in an urban setting where my brother was murdered. Had it happened on Fort Belknap, that would have been another round of how the hell are we going to do? We don't have the resources. We don't have the law enforcement. We don't have what it takes to solve this problem with what we have on hand. So we have to get, I don't know what the words are. We have to be better to each other, one. This communication between seeing things on the urban setting, seeing things on the tribal setting, there's just all these disconnections. And then all of our relatives are just dying with these disconnections. And I'm not blaming anybody in this room. I'm not blaming anybody sitting here or saying no, nobody's doing enough. But knowing that things that had happened to my brother on his journey unfortunately did not put him in the situations that might have turned out differently. And so understanding that missing and murdered Indigenous people, it happens to so many. You can't just look at those who are these levels of poverty, right? Mm-hmm. They're there's attributing factors, but then there's this area where it doesn't matter who you are. If you're Indigenous, if you're on the reservation, you are subject to not being treated like a person. You are subject to be turned down. You're subject and at a higher risk to lose one of your relatives for being who you are. I'm sorry that this is a really confusing going around in circles, but just sitting here and all the different emotions and listening to everybody trying so hard and doing what they can. And I don't give up, but my family deals with it not on social media. So sometimes on social media, there's like these triggers. And so if we're talking about how can we be considerate for families, I think that's one I want to talk about. I had to almost find out through social media about my brother. And seeing what social media has done to this movement is great, but seeing the other side to that, it's heartbreaking. So again, thank everybody. Thank you for listening to me. Again, I know it's a confusing conversation, but for whatever reason, I just got to keep talking about my brother, even if it's not the story that is understood well, because there's so many federal layers in that story is why it's misunderstood. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are about at the end of time. Before we turn it over to our panelists for closing remarks, just a couple of things. I keep hearing about all of these shipping containers being lost at sea, and speaking of social media, all of the things that we can do for the holidays that have nothing to do with consumerism. So I would remind you again, if you'd like to donate to the Honor Scouts, I know Alyssa can use that. If you'd like to donate to the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Peoples Task Force, you can do that. Or contact Tracy if you want to help with her effort after this. That would be an excellent holiday gift, I think, in someone's name. So I'm going to now turn it over to our panelists and allow you to wrap up with some closing thoughts or anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, so I guess one of the last things I'd like to add, I'm glad that Brandy you shared your story, and I would agree with some of the social media stuff that can be really powerful, but at the same time it can be, and I have a hard time finding the right way to say it, but not enough to put red handprints on our faces and take pictures, right? Because that's for you. That's not for people who need it. You know, that's it's something that it can raise awareness, but then I kind of wonder, and I'm sorry to put it this way, then I wonder where people are at Homeless Memorial Day on December 20th. I wonder where people are when Gladys Ray Shelter needs socks and things like that, because Liz is right. People are, are literally selling themselves for somebody to go buy them some clothes, and so when I talked about things that people, are getting in with people, it's things like that. Hey, I'll get you a hotel room for the night, and you don't have to sleep in a room with 150 other people. It's things like that. And so, when it, comes to these things, I guess, something that is, I guess, I'm maybe like really going on unpopular opinions. I might as well roll with this, but it's something that makes me think of like the gatherings thing. Is I see a lot of people who are like in our homeless community be excluded from our gatherings because they're not in recovery yet, or they're not at that place yet. But what it does is it shuts them out from who they need, and it turns them out to people that want to take advantage of them. And I guess maybe that's the way I grew up. Maybe that's the way that I was raised. But I was raised, you don't shut people out. You open the door when they need it. And I've just heard that and be a lot of conversation and event planning. Like, well, we got to make sure that we have a plan for when people are drunk. Well, I mean, my great uncles were drunk 99.9% of the time when I was a little girl, and they were never violent. They were never inappropriate, and they were great. And we never shut them out. I worked with a lot of people over the years that, believe me, without that, they already don't feel worthy of being around us. And they tell people that work with them. I'm sure Amanda's probably heard that before, and it's damn heartbreaking to hear from your own people. I can't go to that. I'm not good in a good enough place for that. People won't want me there. Because I would think that could really be healing for a lot of people, So it's kind of keeping that in mind as, for people who are watching or whatever, planning events and things. There's ways to do it, and it's something that could definitely make all the difference for someone.
Hi, I would just like to thank this young lady right here for sharing your story. I know it's not easy, but that's a part of your healing journey, and I'm happy to be a part of that. One of the other things I'd like to add into all the other things I said was we need to remember our children. What are we doing as a nation when we have all these children that have been whitewashed they've lost their identity, they've lost their connection, like she was saying. I'll let you know, a couple of years ago, I adopted a son. When I first met him, from the work I do, I go all over the country, do searches for missing and murdered. And I looked at his face and I said, "Who do you belong to? Who do you belong to?" Because I know that face. If you're Native, you know what I'm talking about. And I'm sure our non-Indigenous relatives also have your little cliques of people. You can tell who belongs to who. But I had seen his face before. And I said, "Who do you belong to?" And this is before I adopted him. And he said, I don't know. I was adopted. I was told by the people that adopted me that my mother was an alcoholic and she didn't care. She didn't love me. And that's why I was an adopted child. Now, doing this work, I know that's not true. Because I've met some of these mothers. I've met these mothers who have been manipulated and vilified for being traditional mothers or using the extended family relationship to help them out during hard times when they're trying to survive and provide meals on their own tables. So when I met Anthony, and I fell in love with this young man. I met him through my son, and he was leaving to the army. And I adopted him. I adopted him because I said, I'm going to be your native mom till we find your native mom. And knowing that the traumas, I'm really glad to hear somebody say that they were starting a healing center here. But to know that how many mothers have suffered this trauma, I being one of them too. The state is habitual in taking our children. If it doesn't match their standards, what they think is right, your kids are gone. Lucky for me, I fought. I got my kids back. Yeah, I might be an addict. That's probably a result of trauma. I was interviewed by a diocese lady today for an annulment for a divorce for one of my family members. And she asked me, was I active in the church? And I had to tell her, I am not, because I went back to my own traditional ways. I'm a sundancer now. And I value that more importantly because I'm still suffering at the hands of your church. I'm probably 3 or 4 generations from the beginning of the assaults of your people against mine. And so I had to be honest, this is supposed to be for a divorce annulment, and here I am talking about my own trauma to this lady, but that affected me. So we have to understand that these suffrages that we've survived, those are, they say 7 generations to make it right. I'm only on 3 or 4. But knowing that we have resilience and knowing that we have the power of holding each other up. And I think we struggle with that at times as Indian people because we still have that survival instinct. We will sit there and we will, yeah. And then that lateral violence kicks in of one of our own sisters, our own family, our own community members. And we say, yeah, it's okay if you do good, just as long as you don't do better than me. And we need to that's part of the healing. So I commend you for taking that. And if there's anything I can do to support your efforts, you let me know. I'll talk, I'll do a somersault, whatever makes people, it doesn't matter. I'm there for you. We need that so badly in our community. So let's not forget, with that being said, let's not forget about the children that are in foster care now. Who's watching over Cass County's actions? Because from what I've seen a lot of times, if nobody mentions that this is an Indian child or descendant of an Indian family, the courts will run with that. We are losing our children to this administrative BS. And so as a community, we need to be watchful. The village needs to step up and start determining where these kids are, who's overseeing this, what can we do as a community to make sure that the tribe, who is a lot of times not involved as well, to hold these people up to par to care for these children. I don't want to see any children like I did when I met my Anthony. And your story talks about that too. My heart's with you. And I'd just like to thank everybody that came to listen and the allies that are sitting here in the works. I appreciate being a part of this panel, and I'm good to see you too, Ruth.
I just want to say thank you for having me here. I struggle with a lot of the same things. I was also adopted. My dad died at 36 of cirrhosis of the liver. I never met him, but I did get to attend his funeral. And so I didn't know my culture, and I have really received a lot of support from a lot of people in this community. And I, found my family, and my family is wonderful to me. My cousins are here in the audience today, and to support me. And I just really, I have a lot of feelings about all this. I'm getting a little emotional right now. And I'm just thankful for everyone sharing their stories. This is heavy stuff. I had my partner say to me, you have to be careful what you download. And it was about MMIW stuff. And, it's not downloading to us because it's our lives. And I know he did not mean any offense by that, but it's an interesting way to see things. And so it's our everyday spaces, and it's our loved ones and the people we care for. So I just thank you for sharing, Brandy. And I'm thankful for all the work everyone is doing here and everyone that came. Thank you.
I don't want to sound repetitive, but I echo I echo the words of the previous speakers. Honest. Sorry, I laugh at our humor. It's such a heavy topic, but I again want to say thank you for inviting me into this space with everybody. Thank you, Brandy, for sharing. As everybody shared their stories, thoughts, and from the heart, a lot of things come to mind that I could relate with. I think of my upbringing and how I too grew up in a extended household, where my 3 older brothers came to my mom when they were ages 2, 3, and 4 for a temporary placement. But my mom decided to, she wanted to keep them and also didn't want them to get separated. And then years later, we kind of faced a similar situation where our grand twins came to us when they were 6 months old for a temporary placement. And they're now 7. And the ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act, we know is on the chopping block. And so we know that what's happening in Texas, we know that in our neighbors to the south of us in South Dakota face similar struggles with the removal of children. And so that's one area that we are trying to collaborate with the Native American legislators. We've had a few Zoom meetings regarding the issue. And we know that, the Indian ICWA is on the chopping block. And I think of it, the stress and the that it poses. I mean, as a Native American or an Indigenous woman, it's deeply embedded in, I guess you could say, in our ancestral memory or in our DNA. I had a conversation today with the school where our twins attend, and one of them kind of had some issues on the school bus, and so he got a letter sent home today, and then in the next breath they said, and can we get your copy of your guardianship papers? And so I was kind of like, why are you trying to build a case to take our kids away from us? I subtly said that back, like, and they, oh no, we saw the birth certificates don't match up with your name. So was like, okay. So, I sent that off to them, but it's there, that feeling of knowing there's so much work that needs to be done within these systems, and seeing the trends, I guess you could say. Don't really want to say history because we know that's kind of a touchy subject right now too. No, I'm just kidding. But so there's so much work that needs to be done. But again, thank you, Brandy. Thank you, Amanda, Alyssa, Whitney, for sharing your heart. And really bringing it back to the families, centering the families' voices. How best can we support the families, and ultimately, how can we come together as a community to heal, and to work together to support each other. And I remember Sandy Whitehawk. She's done a lot of work with ICWA, and she was adopted out. She's from Rosebud. And she had shared that, we can turn this around in terms of the trauma, in terms of the healing. She talked about the ACEs score, and she said that her grandchildren, now have, they're not impacted by any trauma, and that their scores are very low, are actually at a 0 for the ACEs score. And so that was really hopeful to hear, we can turn this around. We can turn this around. So just want to say, Madzigidads, again, thank you for allowing me to share a few words and to be in this space with you. And I wish I was there in person. So Madzigidads, thank you.
Well, thank you all very much. I know we do have some pamphlets on the back table that the task force has printed out, so you're welcome to take one. If you would like to get a hold of any of the panelists and you're not quite sure how to, you can certainly get a hold of Indigenous Association. I wanted to take just a minute here to thank Lori West for all of the collaboration that she has done to make sure to bring Indigenous issues to the forefront during the One Book, One Community event. And I think when we talk about allies, when we talk about all of the people that help make these things happen, we often forget that there's a lot of people in the background working very hard. So thank you and the City of Fargo for making sure that this is happening. And on a forum, really, where we can take some of the things that were shared that the city might do better and maybe operationalize those. So thank you all, and have a fantastic night.